Hello, my name is Joe and welcome to my channel, Joe's Book and Movie Corner. Today I wanted to make a video about Shaketember 2025. It is a booktube event created by Lukas at A Cruel Reader's Thesis, and this year hosted by Jason at Old Blues Chapter and Verse, Kelly at The Bard is Back, and Nicole at A Day of Small Things. And it's a YouTube event, or a booktube event, where you read Shakespeare plays. This just kind of came out of nowhere in September. I wasn't planning on participating in this, and then I figured, it would be fun to read Shakespeare. I haven't read Shakespeare in a really long time. So I decided to participate, and I'm really glad I did, because I found at least one play that I just was not expecting to love. So I'll talk about that. So I read 3 plays, which I will talk about. First, I just wanted to talk about my experience with Shakespeare in my life. I'll talk about how I'm approaching Shakespeare this time around. And then at the end of the video, I'll just kind of quickly wrap it up with what I'm thinking for the rest of Shaketember. And then also just Shakespeare beyond Shaketember for the rest of my booktube reading life or my book reading life. So let's go ahead and get started. So my experience with Shakespeare, my first introduction to Shakespeare was in the 6th grade. We put on in school a heavily abridged performance of Macbeth, and I played King Duncan. And in the version that I played, I don't know if I played every single scene with Duncan, but I had 80 lines, and that seemed like a lot to me. And what's funny about this play, I want to tell kind of a quick, funny story. At the end of the performance, first, Macbeth was played by like 3 different kids. So each scene, there'd be like a different kid playing him. And there was one of my classmates, he had a big monologue where he just went out on stage by himself and he did this monologue as Macbeth. And at the end of the play, they handed out awards. Like they were making it a competition, which is a bit silly. And they gave this kid who played Macbeth the award for the most regal performance. And I'll tell you, that annoyed me. 1, because I was the king. I was King Duncan. 2, the kid that played Macbeth, he kept, as he was going through his monologue, he kept kind of wandering around the stage. And he kept turning his back to the audience. And I was watching him going, he probably shouldn't be doing that. Keep your, face the audience. Even as a little kid, I knew that wasn't right. And also, the third reason was he kept forgetting his lines, and the teacher had to repeatedly whisper his lines from off stage. I did not miss a line. So to this day, if I think about it, it kind of annoys me that I didn't get the most regal performance award. So that was a lot of fun. So I did like it. The next year, I played a scene, I think it was The Taming of the Shrew. I played a father with 2 daughters, and I was like chastising one of the daughters. And that scene, I got to emote a little bit more. So that was fun. Later on in high school, I read Romeo and Juliet in its entirety. I also read Macbeth. And that's, I think, when I read it in high school, I learned to really love that play. And then we watched the Roman Polanski adaptation, and I thought that was great. And then later on my own, maybe 10, 15 years ago, I had a hankering to just start reading Shakespeare. So I bought a bunch of plays. Here's a preview of one of the ones I read. I bought a bunch of mass market paperbacks. And I read things like Hamlet, Julius Caesar, and I wanted to get into the histories. But I never really made it that far. And with Julius Caesar and Hamlet, I didn't really get a lot out of them. And so I've had, a bunch of these Shakespeare plays just sitting on my shelf since then. So how did I approach Shakespeare this time around? Well, I'm going to link to 2 videos, both from, I think they're very popular classics-related booktubers. Tristan from Tristan the Classics, and then Benjamin McAvoy at what I consider to be probably a very well-known channel, the Hardcore Literature Book Club. I watched both 2 of their videos, which are linked below, and they both had a similar piece of advice. And that piece of advice was, and I'm quoting more Tristan's video, get a copy of Shakespeare that is just the play, and just read the play. or if you have a annotated version, which both of these, all the versions that I have are annotated, ignore the annotations. And that kind of struck a chord with me because, one, I don't like reading a lot of annotations, especially if I'm having trouble with the prose or the language. Because when you stop to read annotations, you're just like stopping the flow of the narrative. And what Tristan in his video and Benjamin McAvoy echoed, they were like, you need to get used to the language. And if you're stopping and starting, that's probably not going to happen. So I didn't read these. I read the plays on my Kindle, and I did. So the versions I had no annotations, so I wasn't stopping the flow. Every once in a while, if I came across a word like repeatedly that I didn't know, I would click on that word, and usually the archaic definition would pop up. So the reason that this advice struck a chord with me was because I am also interested in language learning, and once you start to get comfortable in a language and you're reading a book in a foreign language, a common piece of advice is don't stop to look up every single word. Like, once you start getting the language, just start using context to try to understand new words. And then if you repeatedly see a word, stop to look it up. So their advice kind of spoke to me. I was reading these on my Kindle, no annotations, and I wanted to start with a play. And more advice that came from Tristan in the Classics. He said, read a few plays to get used to the language, like build up to the play that you really want to read. So I started out with a play that I've read before and I know the story. I started out with Romeo and Juliet. And I'll be honest, I appreciated this play. It was a little bit, since it's my first play diving back into Shakespeare, it was a little bit like eating my cultural vegetables. One thing that I did notice, a lot of people, maybe not a lot, but I've noticed online some people recommend Romeo and Juliet and they call out that it's a tragedy, but it's also very funny. And a lot of people also recommend getting into Shakespeare, read a comedy. And I don't know if the Shakespeare's comedy is working for me yet. There was a few moments, the one I'm going to call out, there was some Mercutio moments that I had trouble with, but one in particular, there is the first scene with the nurse. She has this monologue, and you're reading it, and clearly it's meant to be funny. And she must have been making references that without annotations, you're just totally lost, and it went totally over my head. I read half the play, and then I went on YouTube and I looked up a BBC 70s production, and I got to that scene, and the actress's performance, once again, I could tell it was supposed to be funny, but I just didn't get it. So I had moments like that with Romeo and Juliet, a few other Mercutio moments. But overall, I enjoyed it. I liked it, but I didn't love it. So the next play that I read, I decided to, since I've always wanted to read the histories, I decided to start with the first chronologically, the first tetralogy. And I just was like, it's not the play that I really want to read. The history that I really want to read is Richard III, but that's like 8 plays in. So I was like, you know what, let's just start with Richard II. And boy, am I glad that I started with this one and didn't just skip to the end with Richard III, because, man, I love this play. And what's funny is I've been looking up Shakespeare videos and people's kind of rankings of the plays. A lot of people who like Shakespeare, I'm finding out, find Richard II very boring. I did not. I found it electrifying. Obviously, I'm still getting used to the language. I had trouble with a few scenes. I would zone out here and there. But yeah, I really liked it. I found Richard II really interesting. The way he kind of changes halfway through the play, where he becomes a little more self-aware, is fascinating. I watched an old Steve Donahue video where he talks about Richard II, and he mentions, and I've never read anything from Harold Bloom, but he mentions a book where Harold Bloom talks about Shakespeare plays, and he read an excerpt where Bloom talks about Richard II, and Bloom calls Richard II, I can't remember the exact words he uses, but he describes it as more or less emotionally detached. And Steve Donahue in his video thinks that Bloom is wrong, and I agree. I think Bloom is dead wrong. I found this just electrifying. The scene that Bloom points out is the scene where Richard II is saying goodbye to his wife. And I did like that scene, but the scene for me that really did it was when Richard II is on the battlements and Bolingbroke, right? Bolingbroke. If I'm saying that wrong, I am sorry. Anyway, whatever. We're going with Bolingbroke. Henry IV. So Bolingbroke is saying, just give me back my lands. You're still the king. I am your servant. Something along those lines. And I think there's some ambiguity whether Bolingbroke is serious or not. I personally felt him in that moment to be genuine and serious. I found this play, even though, yes, not a lot happens, there's not a lot of action. The writing is beautiful. Richard II's monologues are beautiful. And then there's this interesting relationship between Richard II and the future Henry IV. And I just found it really, really good. I would love to reread this at some point soon. And when I reread it, I will read this version and I will stop and look at the annotations and really take my time with it. But yeah, I strongly recommend this. I thought it was great. Really good. The last play that I read was Henry IV Part 1. It's the next one after Richard II. This one I also liked, but I didn't like it as much as Richard II. And it's interesting. The one thing that didn't really do it for me is something that some people really like. And that's the character of Falstaff. Falstaff is a funny character. Whenever he shows up, it's going to be a humorous scene. And once again, the comedy was not really working for me. Whenever those scenes would pop up, I just wanted to go back to Henry IV and the political stuff and the serious drama. So yeah, going forward, I wonder if I probably should just dive into a flat out comedy and maybe it'll work. But yeah, I wonder if I might want to stick to the more serious Shakespeare plays. The one scene I did like with Falstaff, and don't get me wrong, I see why people like him, but the one scene that did it for me is towards the end when he has a monologue and he gets serious and he talks about. He has a whole monologue about what use do I have for honor or something along those lines. That was really good. But yeah, I'm excited to continue on with the history plays, and yeah, I'm enjoying Shakespeare. So now, what am I going to do moving forward? Coincidentally, I know Nicole at A Day of Small Things has read Richard II, and I wasn't planning on reading something that someone else was reading. It just kind of happened by happenstance. And she also read Edward II by Christopher Marlowe, which is almost a companion piece to Richard II. So I think that's the next play that I'm going to read. So I'll switch over to Christopher Marlowe. And then I don't know if I'll get to it this month, but I'll continue on with Henry IV Part 2 at some point. And just moving forward in life, I feel like, man, Shakespeare plays, they're not very long. I like to, I think, split them up over 2 evenings. But you can read them relatively quickly, even when you take your time with them. So yeah, I think Shakespeare, he's a writer that I think needs to stick with me for the rest of my life. So I'm really happy that I found another play, much like Macbeth when I was in high school, that really clicked for me, and it's Richard II. I loved it. It was great. So that's all for now. Thank you.